This morning is the last of our 3 sermons on eldership. As you know, we're in the midst of electing new elders to serve our congregation, and over the past couple of weeks I've spoken about the governance aspect of eldership and also the pastoral care responsibilities of the elder. And we've read passages of the scripture which spell out the biblical warrant for eldership and how early elders in those early Christian communities were so vital to the well-being of those churches, both spiritually but also for the physical needs of the people. It's clear that the church needs women and men who are gifted for the ministry of eldership. Those who have the wisdom to govern collectively under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and those who have the compassion and the grace to love the people of God in the manner of Jesus Christ, our Good Shepherd. It's also clear that none of us engages in the ministry of eldership on our own merit or our own ability. Just about every sermon I've ever heard preached about ministry or have preached about ministry always ends up leaving me convinced that I'm very unworthy to be a minister. And I think sermons on the qualities and qualifications of elders leave many, including those who may be considering whether they're being called to serve as elders, and those who are already serving as elders, they leave them feeling a little less than confident about their own gifts and their suitability. But as I said last week, God is not looking for perfect people to respond to the call to eldership. But God is seeking our men and women who are willing to be open to the Spirit's gifts, the Spirit's equipping, who are sure of their own failings, but who are even more sure of God's ability to use imperfect people to accomplish God's will. The sense of being called is never about our worthiness, but always about God's faithfulness. The call is never about our worthiness, but always about God's faithfulness. So is God calling you? Is God calling you? It's a question that countless faithful disciples of Jesus have asked throughout the centuries. There's a story of a young farmer standing in his field who one day saw a peculiar cloud formation. And the clouds formed the letters GPC. And this farmer thought to himself, this is a call from God. Go preach Christ. GPC. And he rushed to his church and to the deacons of his church, and he insisted that he was called to preach. And respectful of his zeal, the deacons invited him to fill the pulpit that Sunday. Come that Sunday morning, the sermon was long and tedious and virtually incoherent. When it finally ended, the leader sat there in stunned silence. And finally, a wise deacon muttered to the would-be preacher, "Seems to me the clouds are saying, go plant corn." It's not always easy to discern a specific call from God, right? But there are some things that are usually consistent around the call of God. There is, first of all, this general sense of call. All people are called to follow Christ, to love the Lord our God with all that we are, and to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. To enter into a relationship with Jesus, to live the authentic life. It's not usually a specific call to a religious or church office, whether the office of a minister or a ruling elder. In the Alpha studies that we've been having on Wednesdays, we heard the story of a man named Scott Harrison. He is the founder and CEO of Charity Water. After a decade of indulging in his darkest vices as a nightclub promoter in New York City, Harrison declared a spiritual, moral, and emotional bankruptcy. He left his old line of work, and he spent 2 years on a hospital ship off the coast of Liberia. And he saw the effects of dirty water firsthand. He came back to New York City on a mission. After returning in 2006, Scott turned his full attention to the global water crisis and the then 1.1 billion people living without access to clean water. And he established a small core team in a tiny Manhattan apartment and he created Charity Water. 12 years later, with the help of more than 1 million supporters worldwide, Charity Water has raised more than $360 million and funded over 35,000 water projects in 27 different countries. And when completed, these projects will provide over 9.5 million people with safe, clean drinking water. Now that's an example of a call on a scale which is well beyond the grasp of most of us. But there are countless examples of others. You know the stories of those whose names will never be famous, they'll never be written about in books or shared in videos. But you know those whose decision to follow Christ, to follow Jesus, to live their lives in obedience to Christ has left an impact on the people around them. Maybe just even one person, maybe just even you. Old Lloyd Hansen was a Norwegian Alliance Church minister, well retired. He was into his 80s when he came to work with a group of high school students in a church in Calgary. I remember going to Mr. Hansen's Sunday school class with dread in my heart every Sunday. Every Sunday, this old Norwegian guy, he had suspenders and his pants came up to about here, he would unfurl his chart on the book of the Revelation. And it was full of dragons and fire and crisscrossing paths and all sorts of warnings and doom and gloom stuff. And he would tell us about the coming end of the world and how we needed to get our lives in order. He would rail against what was wrong, especially with the young people of the time. And normally I would struggle to keep awake during Mr. Hansen's class, but one day something he said caught my full attention. These young boys today, he blustered. These young boys are doing things that they shouldn't with those young girls. Why, they go into those drugstores and buy those condominiums. I almost fell out of my chair. You know, old Mr. Hansen didn't always get his examples right. But what he always got right was his love for the kids he taught. Right? What he always got right was his love for the kids he taught. He and his wife lived in a mobile home, and they sold those shapely vitamins to supplement their meager retirement income. But they would have the youth in our church come over to their house regularly, and they would treat us so well. Lemonade and hot dogs every time we came over. They would treat us so well. We always knew we were welcomed and loved. And when I responded to the call to ministry, I wrote down the name of the Reverend Lloyd Hansen as one of the people that most affected me as a minister in my life. We're all called to follow Jesus, each and every one of us. It doesn't matter the size of the impact we make, just that we make ourselves available to what the Spirit will do with us. But there are specific positions within the church, such as an elder, that some of us are called to, specific positions. The Bible is full of stories of people called to a particular ministry or to a particular work. And what they have in common is that the call always originates in God. Right? The call always originates with God, not with us. Isaiah the prophet had a vision of the Lord sitting on a throne high and lifted up. And when he saw the Lord, he cried out, "Woe is me, for I am lost, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and I have seen the Lord." And he knew this wasn't a good thing. He knew that he wasn't worthy, that he wasn't clean, that he couldn't be in the sight of the Lord, the King, the Lord of hosts. But God cleansed him, taking his guilt away and blotting out his sin. The God who revealed himself to Isaiah, who called Isaiah, also equipped him, allowing him to respond to God's question of, "Who shall we send?" by saying, "Here am I, send me. Here am I, send me." This pattern gets repeated in the call of the first disciples from our reading from Luke chapter 5. After using Simon Peter's boat as a bit of a mobile aquapulpit, Jesus tells the fishermen, let's go out a little deeper. And why don't you let down your nets? And of course the fishermen are thinking, come on, You're a rabbi, but you're no fisherman because you know you don't go down nets at this time of the day. It's the wrong time to fish. But they humored Jesus and they lowered their nets. And of course, the nets were just overflowing with fish so much that they were swamping the boats into which they loaded the fish. Simon Peter recognized the nature of the man who stood in front of him, and he fell to his knees, saying, "Get away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. Get away from me, for I'm a sinful man." But Jesus responded to him, saying, "Don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. From now on, you're going to be catching people." They left everything, and they followed him. The call of God always originates in God. And those whom God calls, God equips. Isaiah, he's not worthy on his own. Neither was Simon Peter, nor any of the other disciples. Abraham or Sarah, Jacob, Moses, David, John the Baptist, Paul. It doesn't matter who you name. It's never their ability which leads to the call, but always God's faithfulness which allows sinful men and women, unclean, to respond to the call, to leave the old ways behind, to follow the new ways of the one who promises new life. Today is St. Patrick's Day, and between the consumption of green beverages, maybe we might actually remember the story of St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland. I was at Vancouver School of Theology on Thursday, and at chapel, Ross Lockhart preached about the story of Patrick's call to be a missionary in Ireland. And Ross reminded us that Patrick had been in Ireland before he went there as a missionary. In fact, he was kidnapped as a young boy from England and taken to Ireland. And he spent 6 years in captivity there. And after 6 years, he made a daring escape and was eventually able to return back home. But during those difficult years in captivity, Patrick's faith evolved from that of a casual, cultural Christian to that of a devout young man whose only hope was in the Lord. He writes in his later confessions that he prayed 100 prayers every morning and every night during his time in captivity. He was transformed. And even when he came back home, he was never peaceful. He was never at peace about being back home. One night he had a vision of a man who came to him holding a huge bag of letters, and these letters were the voices of the people of Ireland, who begged him to return to them, to walk among them. And Patrick writes, "I felt my heart breaking, and I wasn't able to read anymore, so I woke up." He made the decision to study for ministry, and eventually he did return to Ireland, and he preached the gospel there for 40 years. Imagine going back to a place and to a people who held you as prisoner, to that place which was part of the darkest time of your life, to a place that they called Hibernia, the Roman name for Ireland. It literally means the ends of the earth. Imagine going to the ends of the earth. But those whom God calls, God equips. Is God calling you? The final story of call I want to speak of this morning is from the Gospel reading from the first chapter of Luke. And we all know this story, right? We call it the Annunciation. It's the story of the angel Gabriel coming to Mary, telling her that she's favored by God, that the Lord is with her. But it's not only an annunciation, it's a call story. It's a call story. Most of the call stories in the Bible are about men, so it's good. It's good that we have one about Mary, a pivotal call in God's salvation history with humanity. Mary's answer to Gabriel's good news is one of perplexity. Perplexity. She was perplexed and pondered what this meant. The actual Greek word for perplexity means to be wholly disturbed. To be wholly disturbed. And really, who wouldn't be? An angel of the Lord were appeared to any one of us and told us, "Good news, you are favored by God." There isn't a soul among us who wouldn't be wholly disturbed. Right? This kind of stuff doesn't happen every day. It's no wonder that the next words out of the mouth of Gabriel are to Mary, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid." The angel tells Mary what's going to happen. That she will conceive and bear a son, who will be named Jesus, that he will be great and will be called Son of the Most High, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Well, maybe that's all fine and dandy, but the news does nothing to alleviate Mary's perplexity, her sense of being wholly disturbed. How can this be? I'm a virgin. None of this makes any sense to Mary, and the angel's answer to her question doesn't make her feel any better. How do you think Mary slept that night? You know, we always get this picture of a calm, controlled, and composed Mary, able to give birth in a manger surrounded by animals. But I can't imagine that it was that simple for her. She's wholly disturbed. Remember Isaiah? Remember Simon Peter? When confronted by the presence of God, whether in a vision or in the person of Jesus, they fell to their knees, trembling, scared out of their minds. Right? How could it have been any different for Mary? This isn't just an annunciation. Good news, Mary. This is a call story. And just like all the other call stories, it starts with God. God calls Mary. God calls Mary to a life which begins with perplexity, a holy disturbance. Or is it a holy disturbance? With an H-O-L-Y. Is that what a call is? A holy disturbance. It's the same for us, isn't it? The call of God in our lives, the call to a specific ministry, the call to eldership can leave us wholly disturbed and fearful. Who, me? I think you got the wrong person. Besides, I have other plans. Mary had other plans. She was engaged to a young man, probably a very nice guy. She was planning to spend her whole life, a quiet, ordinary, simple life, with Joseph. And now what? Now what? Even if you dispense with the biological impossibility of what the angel had said to her, it goes deeper than that. What about my life? What about my life? What will happen to me if I say yes to God? It's going to disturb everything. It's going to disturb everything. What will Joseph say? What will the neighbors think? And maybe you're thinking the same thing. Is God calling me? It's going to disturb the plans I have for my life. How could I ever do what God is calling me to do? What will those close to me think and say? You? You sure? Sure it wasn't something you ate? I have plans for my life, and the call to eldership isn't part of it. But Mary says yes. She says yes to the call of God. She says yes, not because Gabriel gave her an answer that she could comprehend, not because she could make sense of what was happening to her, or because she knew deep in her heart that she had the strength, that she had the faith, or that she believed without question when Gabriel said, look, nothing's impossible with God. She didn't say yes because of any of those things. She said yes because ultimately she trusted in the faithfulness of God. She said yes because she trusted the faithfulness of God, even in her perplexity, even in her disturbed state. We don't respond to the call of God because we know we have it in us to do what God asks of us. We don't respond to the call of God because we know that our capacity is large enough to deal with uncertainty or mystery. We don't respond to the call of God because we think that we have the intelligence or the emotional stability or that we're gifted. We respond because we trust that the God who calls us is faithful. Is God calling you? Is God calling you? I think you know. I think you know. There's an inner call somewhere in our hearts, in our spirits. And unlike the farmer who thought he was to be a preacher, we also have an understanding of an outer call. Our inner call is confirmed by an outer call. And in the case of choosing elders, that outer call includes the discernment of the congregation. You got to be nominated, right? You got to be chosen. There has to be both. I remember a person in my former congregation who was so sure that she was supposed to be an elder that when her name didn't appear on the final ballot, she came to see me. She wasn't at all pleased. Why? She demanded, why did you reject my name? Why did the session reject my name? She was under the mistaken belief that she had actually been nominated by a couple of people that she had talked to, but they never followed up. They never nominated her. When I told her that we had never received a nomination with her name on it, that we had not rejected her, well, she was embarrassed beyond belief. For her, the situation had become beyond retrieving. Sadly, she left the church thereafter. She left our congregation thereafter. Our sense of inner call needs to be confirmed by the outer call, the discernment of others, the people of God. If the members of this congregation are led by the Spirit of God to choose you, to confirm the inner call that you're wrestling with, please remember this. Please remember this. Yes, it will be disruptive, because it's always easier to say no. It will be disruptive because it's always easier to say no. Not me, not now. The call of God is a holy disturbance, but the call comes from God. And those whom God calls, God equips, God enables, and God encourages. But a God who calls is faithful. It's not about our ability. Like Simon Peter, like the other disciples, like Isaiah, and all those who've been called throughout history, we too are sinful, we too are unclean, we are far from perfect, but God is perfect. God is perfect. God is faithful. So remember, if you say yes, you're not saying yes to yourself. You're not saying yes to yourself. If you say yes, you're saying yes to God. Yes to God's ability to use us, even us, to do God's will. I encourage you to continually pray around God's discernment. Pray for discernment around God's call to you, both in your life in general, all of us in our life in general, and maybe specifically to serve as an elder in this congregation. The God who calls you is faithful. Thanks be to God. Amen.